Your first book was your young adult.
Yes. First of all, I would say that if you were to read all three of these, this one is they are totally different. They're diverse and so forth. This one is more intended for a teenage audience. This one is intended probably for young adult to adult.
Okay.
And this one is more adult oriented.
Okay.
For two reasons. One is that when you talk about a war, it isn't like telling Goldilocks and the Three Bears story. If you're going to be accurate about it, there are things, both terminology that is used, and the rest of it, is pretty graphic. And of course, what's going on, as we say right in the book, war is the ultimate obscenity.
True.
Now,
True. Yeah.
So,
Very much so.
they sort of grade up from teenage to pretty much all levels, but you probably wouldn't want to be at least a teenager before you read this one, to an adult, we call that rated A for adult. But also because there are some psychological aspects to this one that a teenager, unless he's really sharp, won't pick up. The other thing that makes these three somewhat similar in my mind is that I try to include a little bit of mystery so that it isn't just totally, you can see what's coming on the next page. So there's a little mysticism in it, and a couple twists. And I think I've gotten better at doing that, and I particularly like this last one because it does do that. And I've gotten calls from friends who have read it all over, and they said, in fact, one of them says I had two reactions. The first one, he says, is admiration for what you and your co-author had done. The second one was, he says, I'm totally frustrated because I can't figure out where reality stopped and delusion set in, and when they went back and forth between the two, which was the intent.
Wow.
Is to put the reader in the position of the protagonist and try to give them the same feelings that the protagonist was having at the time he was going through these rather bizarre experiences. So that's why they're similar. So this one here was written with my grandson, who's exactly 50 years younger than I, and he was 13 and 14 at the time, so it was about 10 years ago. He's now 24 and an investment, he's a financial analyst, I guess is what he's called, in an investment firm in Chicago. But we started writing it because he wasn't doing well in school, and I had become a surrogate father to him. And as we would be out on camping trips and ball games and so on and so forth, we would start talking. We somehow got talking about what life was going to be when he was as old as I was at the time. And so, of course, that's pretty hard for him to admit. So I said, okay, now 50 years ago, this is what television was, black and white, and it had, you got three channels, and most of those were snowy, and, today you have this and so forth, and we didn't have DVDs. DVDs? What'd you have? We had records. And so on.
And that was if we were lucky,
So we started out, and we started making little lists of stuff, and then we said, okay, so what's it going to be when you're as old as I am? And so we took that theme and we applied it to everything from soup to nuts. I mean, from the simplest thing like television to world politics, to the geopolitical structure of the entire world and nations, and then we were going to just put that in a time capsule, and he was going to open it 50 years from now and show it to his grandson. And then we decided, well, we'll make a short story out of it. Well, it kept growing, and so it ended up like that, and I went ahead and had it self-published so that he would have that. He didn't have to put it in a time capsule to show his children.
That is great.
So that's the genesis of that story. This one, the head of Khalid Salam.
Yeah.
This was Heather's. I just went through that one while we were killing time. My profession, before I decided to goof off and try my hand at writing, was a civil engineer. And so I was a civil engineer both on the military side for 24 years and then 14 more years on the private sector. And after 9/11 hit, people began to realize that we did have vulnerabilities within the United States. And I thought to myself, how vulnerable certain parts of our infrastructure were. And I thought, if I had just a crew of a dozen or 20 of the guys who worked for me back when we did this and so forth, I could wreak all, and I had the will to do it. I could wreak havoc on this country. Now, hopefully, the Al-Qaedians and the rest of them, I just coined the word, don't, aren't that conversant with it. But still, we for somebody, and so that was my plot concocted of a character, an evil protagonist by the name of Ami Shabaki, who came to the United States, was educated there, but then was turned off by Americans. Went back to his native land, which happened to be Syria, Damascus, and then returns to start the next campaign against the evil Americans, the infidels. And so the story is what he does, and then of course you have to have a good guy. As we're saying down there, this is the 24 star. I forget his name now, but the star of 24 would play the character in the movies we had, and so he's the FBI counter to the terrorist, and so they play back and forth, and it's kind of like not a spy, but it's it's kind of a, I guess you call it an adventure story.
Story.
Terrorism, but the whole idea, as I say in the start of the story in the preface, is that I don't tell you this to give anybody any ideas on what to do. In fact, most of the ideas have a fatal flaw in them, so that I haven't given anybody the blueprint on how to do something. But some of them are pretty simplistic. It doesn't really take a genius to do it. But the idea is to make Americans aware that when you see something that looks amiss, which we didn't. We had people taking flying lessons and didn't want to know how to land, and so on. And so the idea is to make Americans more aware that we do in fact have infiltrators, and I still think we do, quite frankly, because we haven't been, quote, attacked. I don't think the next attack is going to come by somebody taking over airplanes. We've got that one covered. It's going to be something else in some other way, and that's what's in this book.
And it's a lot what Greg talks about with his. I mean,
Yeah.
you guys could do something
Yeah, well,
together.
he's real and I'm fictional, you see. But so that way I can let my imagination run wild based upon, some of the things that I know as an engineer.
Yeah. Wow. But yeah.
The one I like best,
Yeah.
as long as you've got a captive audience here, is the most recent one, and this is a fellow Vietnam vet and myself.
How are you doing?
For 40 years, we had these anecdotes and stories and feelings about the war and about the environment of the war that we had never, we talked about. We'd get together with our buddies and we'd get off on these things, and we kept saying, we got to write these down. And so we said, okay, we're going to do it. And this was about 4 or 5 years ago we started doing that, and it's taken us this long to produce a book. And it's a humorous satire, admittedly dark humor, and it has basically 2 thrusts, 2 primi, if that's the plural premise. The first one is that when you're in a war environment, it changes your life. And whether you admit it or not, and most people don't, by the way, I never did until very recently, you think you're macho and so on and so forth, to greater or lesser degrees, depending on the personality, depending on the exposure, lots of variables in there. You just can't go into a different environment. It is so alien to what we grow up in the United States that your life has changed. Which is one of the reasons why many of the women particularly, and some men, who have not been exposed to that cannot relate. You know, it's just, you know, it's like saying, here's the way life is on Mars, and you say,
Yeah, well, yeah.
but that's the first premise. The second one is that the book is really about post-traumatic stress syndrome, but we never mention it because that was not even coined in those 42 years ago. But yet it existed, and that's why we had vets came back, and all of a sudden they dropped out of society and they hung around the Washington Monument, and they had problems, their marriages failed, and so on and so forth. It probably happened in World War II, it happened in Korea and so forth, but we sort of suppressed it in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now it's become something that is recognized, and particularly because of the greater intensity of the weaponry that is being used, the injuries, and the fact that several years or several wars ago, people who went to war didn't come back. If they got injured, they died. Now we have the capability to bring them back. We bring back a very shattered psyche and a very shattered body sometimes, and that's different. So the second premise of this is that our protagonist has PTSD, of course, and how it happens and how it can happen, and basically anybody who went to Vietnam, anybody who particularly was in the unit that we described, can relate to it very much, and that's where my audience is. But it's been read by, I don't know, 100 people now, I guess, and I've gotten reviews from probably, somewhere a dozen and a half, something like that, and most of them have been, you hit on something that's meaningful.
Wow.
So you have questions of me?
Wow. It's just your whole process, how you've evolved as a writer, and it's fascinating to listen to.
Get away.
Well, I've always enjoyed writing. I have, and I always like to tell stories. I like to make up stories. And I'm kind of, is this your son?
Yes, this is Ben. Yes, yes.
How old is he?
8.
8. Okay.
Going on 18.
Good size boy for 8.
Yes. Yes. Unfortunately, he gets that naturally.
I
He
have a
gets
10-year-old grandson, so I haven't seen him in a while. No, the process was evolutionary, and but I found out that I enjoyed the challenge of being able to put it down and then make it all come together. And you don't write it just start writing it. You write a little bit, and pretty soon you forget that you've written something back there, and you've covered it again in a different way, and so you got to sort all that out. And so that's making it all come together is the challenge that I enjoy.
in this one, your second book. As far as, do you, when you are writing, do you do like a character sketch first? I mean, and you kind of get an idea, okay, this is my character, this is, or is it more organic in that it kind of, you start and see where it goes?
I have a beginning and I have sort of an end.
Okay, that's fair.
And then I just let the plot evolve from there. And I may have some benchmarks that I definitely want to bring into it. But normally, as you start telling the story and as a character begins to interact with others, the plot sort of builds itself. At least that's my process. Everybody has a little different one.
Yeah.
And again, it depends on the book. We had a whole laundry list of stuff that we wanted to weave into this one. So that helped the framework.
That was your sketch, so to speak.
That was that one.
But you had all these life experiences.
And we had those that we had to get in, and writing with a co-author is totally different than writing by yourself. I didn't have any problem with my grandson because, you know, in the transactional analysis, I could say, David, John, we're not going to do it this way because this makes no sense.
And that's the way we went, you know.
And so that was okay, but a lot of his ideas about what's going to happen